and welcome along to another Acid Folk Flashbacks episode of the Acid Trash Jamboree, where we take a look at another smattering of trippy and psychedelic acoustic-based music. As with the last video, I've dug out another trio of albums from the 70s, so without further ado, let's check them out. We start this episode with the Australian group Tully and their 1972 album Sea of Joy, which served as a soundtrack to the Paul Witzig surfing movie of the same name. Now, I've never seen the film, only the trailer, though going off that, I'm probably best off just sticking with the music. And yeah, thankfully it's eminently listenable on its own. The first part of the title track opens with a kind of stately yet melancholic melody line that the likes of Froop and Griffin used to specialise in, before moving into a rather stock but still groovily entertaining psychedelic jam, over which the group enthusiastically intone the name of the movie. After the whimsical miniature, pseudo-tragic dramatic, the vibe turns dark and psychedelic with the Eastern-flavoured psych folk wig out Follow Me, which is actually reprised later in the record in an even darker form as Down to the Sea, with disturbing, electronically treated screams burbling away in the background. Though the piece does end on a more hopeful note, its coda bringing to mind the one from Lou Reed's Perfect Day of all things. Elsewhere, psych folk heads will also be tickled pink by the likes of Syndrome, which starts life as a moody, modal meditation played on assorted Indian instruments before moving into a pulsing, percussion-only section. Now, I came to Tully via Extradition, a short-lived psych folk group who made the lovely album Hush in 1971 before splitting up. Extradition comprised of Tully's Richard Lockwood, as well as Colin Campbell and Shayna Stewart, who, once Extradition had split, both joined Tully in time to record the Sea of Joy soundtrack. Fans of Hush will recognise Campbell's lovely I Feel the Sun, which is given the Tully treatment here, whilst Stewart provides crystal clear, almost Sandy Denny-esque vocal leads on the gorgeous Softly Softly and the down-home rootsy Thank You, which resembles Denny's group Fotheringay in full-on the band worship mode. So yeah, a mixed bag with some over-earnest hippy-dippiness, making a couple of the pieces a little bit cloying. Otherwise, yeah, I really like this. Unfortunately, I'm woefully behind in checking out the rest of Tully's stuff, so I can't say how it stacks up against the rest of their discography, though what I will say is that it certainly makes an excellent companion piece to the aforementioned Extradition album. Next we have In My Lady's Chamber, the debut album by Joseph Pusey, which he released on his own Cerebella label in 1977. Though, as others have commented before me, this could have been recorded and released as early as 10 years before this, such as its dedication to the classic acid folk sound. Opener, The Chambermaiden's Dream, is an instrumental 12-string acoustic guitar piece, pitched somewhere between the styles of American primitive players like Leo Kottke and Peter Lang, with its upbeat, sunny tune and chiming harmonics. Pusey begins to show a little bit more of himself in the wonderful Blue Jay Preacher, a faux traditional tune with both medieval and eastern shades, and yet more beautifully nimble and fleet-fingered 12-string work, brushing up alongside gossamer light xylophone tinklings for an extra bit of pentangle flavour. Yeah, with its female vocal accompaniment and rousing instrumental coda, this is easily one of the record's highlights. The next two songs, The Lady Nicolette and Renaissance, add piano and flutes to the mix in a much slower and moodier in tone, with the latter predating the dark, neo-folk troubadour stylings of projects like In Gowan Ring by a good 15 years. And following the sub-2-minute ditty A Cottontail, we hit the album's epic, The Red Planet Descends, which is somewhat reminiscent of the Incredible String Band, taking us on a whistle-stop tour through assorted historical periods and exotic cultures in a neat 7 minutes. Opening in full Renaissance fair mode, by the midway point, Pusey has transported us to some peaceful garden in ancient Japan, Then before we know it, we're up in Glen Row on a sunny day with Robin Williamson sitting in on mandolin. Well, that's what it sounds like to me anyway. I mentioned him in the last video, but After the Rain is another song in the mellow modal style of Phil Pearlman, with gorgeous clouds of echoey female vocals occasionally drifting by, whilst the closing title track returns us to the liquid 12-string chime-ins from earlier in the record, staying quiet and understated before suddenly coming to life in its last few bars with an approximation of a flighty Eastern European folk dance tune. So yeah, with its evocative songs performed on a rich variety of instruments, this one comes highly recommended. Pusey's voice perhaps isn't the strongest, but there's no doubting that he was a formidable talent, crafting this LP in his early 20s. Sadly, it appears he only put out one other recording, a collaborative effort with Robert Nakashian entitled Sands of Night, before dying in early 2004, aged just 48. Lastly for now, Just Our Way of Saying Hello by the Courtyard Music Group, which was the brainchild of a chap named Richard Jones, a staff member at the Kilkehanity School, aka the Killy. Now, this was a so-called free school in Galloway, Scotland, in which students were responsible for managing their own learning, and over 2 summers back in the 1970s, residents at the Killy got the opportunity to craft and record 2 albums whilst they were there. The first was a self-titled effort released under the moniker Killy Country in 1973, which was followed by Just Our Way of Saying Hello in 1974, this time credited to the Courtyard Music Group. Now, as with the Clearing LP that I discussed in the last video, this often gets labelled as acid folk, though again, seeing as this was a literal school project, I very much doubt that there was any consumption of hallucinatory chemicals or anything illicit at all for that matter during its making. So yeah, any trippiness is the result of musical influence alone, and yeah, it turns out that Just Our Way of Saying Hello is quite the slippery customer stylistically. Quite a lot of the album is instrumental, with even a number of the vocal tracks featuring exploratory musical passages, such as opener The Seasons, which begins with a reading of the ancient traditional tune Summer Is A-Comin' In, before moving into jammier, minor key territory, the whole thing woven together by badass funky bass and tinkling glockenspiel. Admittedly, some of the purely instrumental pieces, particularly the ones that feature descant and tenor recorders, do carry a bit of an end-of-term school concert vibe, but thankfully they're performed quite well with no squeaky bum notes that I can hear. As you'd expect, the students' own lyrics on the vocal-heavier pieces, like the slightly prog-inflected 2074 and Song for Claire, are a bit on the naive side, so it's maybe just as well that they're kept to a minimum. Now, whilst there's undoubtedly some nice work in the first half of the album, the main event here is the epic 14-minute Jam and Gypsy Cream, aka The Magician, which was Courtyard Music Group's vehicle for extended psychedelic improvisation, and rather aptly was cut during a nighttime session, with even the younger students apparently allowed to stay up late to witness its inception. Opening with quiet, mysterious layers of freeform cymbals, glock and wah guitar, the piece brings to mind late 60s, just post Syd Barrett Pink Floyd, or maybe even early Ashra Temple, before coalescing into a simple but effectively groovy 2-chord vamp with hazy, dreamy vocal passages acting as bookends to a long and winding bluesy guitar solo, slightly reminiscent of Rory Gallagher, though more so in its biting, trebly Stratocaster tone than in any kind of virtuoso playing techniques. The 2015 CD reissue that you see pictured features a generous helping of bonus tracks, all of which are rehearsal takes of pieces from the album, including an even longer stab at Jam and Gypsy Cream. This loses the mystical, psychedelic opening section and replaces the electric guitar solo with some 3-way noodling on violin, harmonica and recorder. This is quite nice and almost touches on avant-garde free folk in spots, but overall this version lacks the fluid groove of the album take, feeling altogether much stiffer. So yeah, another nice effort, bringing to mind fellow lo-fi legends like Stone Angel and Midwinter, as well as the great Water Into Wine band and even Magnet. Yeah, there's definitely more than a hint of Summer Isle innocence about Courtyard Music Group, and a big portion of this album could have slotted seamlessly onto the soundtrack for The Wicker Man, which isn't something you can say about too much psych folk or folk rock stuff. So that wraps up another small selection of psych folk pleasantry. I hope it's been of interest and has maybe given you something new to listen to. Stay tuned for more like this, as well as future videos talking about all manner of cool, lesser talked about music and films. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on the Acid Trash Jamboree.